What you dare to assume about yourself becomes the law of your world. You stand each day at the crossroads of assumption and doubt. One path leads to freedom, the other to bondage. One lifts you into the life of your desire, the other chains you to the life of your fear. Doubt is nothing but faith placed in the wrong direction. It is belief in failure, trust in lack, reliance upon limitation. And yet, you were never meant to be the servant of fear. You are the operant power. The world within you shapes the world without. If you assume with faith, it is done unto you. The secret lies not in waiting for evidence, but in boldly assuming the evidence is already here. To assume is to live now in the reality you wish to experience. It is to think from the end, not toward it. When you feel the wish fulfilled, you call into existence the things that do not yet appear. That is the law. When doubt whispers, "What if it doesn't work?" you must answer, "It is already mine." When fear says, "Look at the facts," you must reply, "Facts change, but my assumption creates." Stand guard at the door of your mind, for the state you occupy is the life you live. Choose assumption. Choose faith. Imagine yourself already possessing what you desire. Walk as though it were true. Speak from its reality. Feel it in the depths of your being. For what you dare to assume and persist in assuming must harden into fact. Assumption shapes reality because every inner state we occupy inevitably expresses itself in the outer world. When you assume a role, an identity, or a condition, you are clothing yourself in its reality, and the world mirrors it back to you as fact. The imagination is not a place of idle fantasy, but the workshop of creation, and what you dare to assume with conviction becomes the seed planted in consciousness. Whether noble or unworthy, assumption persists until it manifests, for reality is nothing more than crystallized belief, and every assumption, once sustained, hardens into the very life you live. Doubt is misplaced faith and fear, because it directs the same creative power that could build your desire toward the very outcome you dread. Every time you doubt, you are affirming the possibility of failure, nurturing it with attention, and giving it strength through belief. Doubt is not the absence of faith, but the misuse of it, for you are always believing in something, whether it is the fulfillment of your dream or the collapse of it. When you allow doubt to govern your thoughts, you are in truth imagining vividly, but you are imagining the wrong end. Fear feeds on this misdirected faith, whispering limitations and presenting shadows as facts, and yet all it has to work with is the power you willingly hand over. If you were to take the same intensity of thought you invest in doubt and anchor it in assumption, the whole structure of your experience would shift. The law makes no distinction between what you believe in joy or what you believe in dread. It simply produces the harvest of your seed. Doubt, then, is proof of your power, for it reveals how faithfully imagination obeys belief, even when pointed toward fear. You are the operant power, because nothing in your world moves without your consent of belief. Nothing comes alive until you give it life through assumption. The universe is not an external force dictating your destiny. It is a mirror reflecting the activity of your own inner state. Every thought you persist in, every feeling you nurture, every vision you occupy is the cause, and the effects that appear around you are nothing more than shadows cast by your own consciousness. To say you are the operant power is to recognize that imagination does not work independently of you. It awaits your direction, your command, your persistence. If you dwell in fear, the world must conform to fear. If you dwell in faith, the world must conform to faith. The law does not choose for you, it responds to you. Life is not happening to you, it is happening through you, for the creative act is always within. To operate powerfully is not to force, but to assume and remain faithful to the assumption until it hardens into fact. Your task is not to wonder how, but to sustain the end in feeling, knowing that the unseen is already forming itself into visibility, live from the end, not toward it. Because to move toward a desire is to confess you do not yet possess it, and the state of not having only creates more of the same. The secret is to think from the place where your wish is already fulfilled, to inhabit the end as though it were your present reality. When you live from the end, you no longer seek or strive. You rest in the certainty that it is done, and every thought, word, and action flows naturally from that state. Imagination becomes your dwelling place, not a fleeting moment of escape, but a permanent address from which you operate. To live toward the end is to chase a horizon that never arrives, but to live from the end is to anchor yourself in completion, knowing the unseen must arrange itself to support your inner conviction. The outer world cannot resist the persistence of an assumed state, for it is only the projection of consciousness. When you clothe yourself in the feeling of already being, already having, already living the reality desired, you shift the axis of your entire being and life reshapes itself accordingly. From the end, you speak differently, you walk differently, you expect differently, for you are no longer a seeker but a possessor. This is why faith is the substance of things hoped for faith dares to claim completion before a single fact appears. The end is not a distant event, but a present possession in consciousness, and by dwelling there, you compel the outer world to catch up, live not as one hoping it may come, but as one for whom it is already here. And the difference between living toward and living from will reveal itself in the transformation of your reality. Assume boldly without waiting for proof, because proof is nothing more than the echo of what you have already accepted within yourself. And to wait for evidence before believing is to reverse the very order of creation. The visible follows the invisible. The seen is born out of the unseen. And imagination is the womb from which all appearances emerge. To demand proof before assumption is to place effect before cause, and in doing so you keep yourself chained to the old state. The world cannot reveal to you what you have not yet dared to claim, for every outer change requires an inner shift first. Bold assumption means stepping into the feeling of possession without hesitation, without apology, without the need to justify or explain. It is choosing to trust the unseen law of consciousness more than the fleeting testimony of the senses. The timid assumption is easily shaken, but the bold assumption endures, for it is clothed in conviction. When you dare to assume with boldness, you align yourself with the creative force that shapes galaxies, and that power knows no resistance. Boldness in imagination is not arrogance. It is fidelity to the truth that consciousness is the only reality. When you assume your desire boldly, you are not waiting for circumstances to give you permission. You are granting yourself permission to live from the end now. You are declaring that what you feel inwardly is of greater authority than what you see outwardly. To wait for proof is to admit doubt, to confess that the senses hold the greater power. But to assume boldly is to proclaim that imagination alone is the architect of destiny. Consider how every achievement first required someone to believe before evidence appeared, how every invention, every discovery, every creation was once only an assumption sustained until it solidified into fact. The law works in the same way for your desires. The proof you seek will come, but only after assumption, never before it. When you dare to assume boldly, you stand unmoved by appearances, you refuse the whispers of fear, you silence the demand for visible signs, and you rest in the unseen reality that already exists within you. The proof is not needed for creation. The proof is the result of creation. Therefore, assume as though it were already done. Persist with courage. Walk in the conviction that your inner state is greater than the outer world, and let bold assumption carry you into the life you desire. Facts bend to persistent assumption, because facts are not fixed laws carved into stone. They are simply the crystallized results of prior belief, and whatever has been created by assumption can be reshaped by assumption. What the world calls fact is only the outpicturing of a state of consciousness that has been sustained long enough to harden into form. Every condition, circumstance, and limitation you encounter has its roots in imagination, for nothing appears in the outer world that was not first conceived in the inner world. To treat facts as immovable is to hand your power over to shadows, but to recognize them as malleable expressions of consciousness is to awaken to your creative authority. Persistent assumption is the secret by which facts lose their seeming permanence. To assume once and abandon the state is to plant a seed and never water it, but to persist, to remain faithful to the inner conviction regardless of appearances, is to compel reality to shift. Facts may resist at first, for the momentum of past belief still echoes. But persistence wears down resistance. Persistence overrides evidence. Persistence bends the so-called solid into the shape of your sustained assumption. The law is impartial. It does not argue. It does not weigh probabilities. It simply reflects the state you occupy. And when you refuse to waver, when you stand firmly in the end, the outer must conform. Consider how often the world has declared something impossible, only for persistence to prove it possible. Every breakthrough, every advancement, every miracle in history is testimony to the fact that yesterday's facts are today's illusions. What one generation calls truth, the next generation sees as error, for facts are only temporary agreements given life by collective belief. If entire civilizations can shift their facts, how much more can an individual who knows the law bend the facts of their personal world? To persist in assumption is to live beyond the tyranny of appearances. When you assume wealth in the face of poverty, health in the face of sickness, love in the face of loneliness, you are declaring that consciousness is greater than fact. The senses may mock you, circumstances may contradict you, yet the unseen responds to the persistence of your inner stance. Eventually the facts must yield, for they cannot withstand the unrelenting pressure of sustained imagination. This is why you are told to walk by faith and not by sight, for sight only reveals the past, while faith dares to call forth the future. Facts are not your master, they are your servant. They are obedient reflections of the state you inhabit, and the moment you cease to give them power through acceptance, they lose their authority. The longer you persist in a new assumption, the more the old facts crumble, until what once seemed immovable dissolves into nothing, and the new state stands as the only fact of your life. Persistence is the hammer that breaks the stone, the steady flame that melts the hardest metal, the unwavering gaze that bends reality itself. To persist in assumption is to declare again and again that only your inner conviction matters, and when that conviction is sustained, the outer world must bow to its decree. For facts cannot stand against the creative force of a consciousness that refuses to yield. Guard your mind against fear, because fear is the thief of imagination, the intruder that creeps into consciousness and disguises itself as reason, evidence, and caution. Yet its only aim is to rob you of the creative authority you already possess. Fear does not come from the world outside. It is born within and sustained by the attention you give it. Every fearful thought is a seed planted in the fertile soil of imagination, and if left unchecked, it grows into the very experiences you dread. To guard your mind against fear is not to fight it with force, for what you resist you strengthen, but to refuse it entrance. To deny it lodging in your inner world by deliberately choosing the state of faith over the state of doubt. Fear thrives on repetition. It whispers the same story until it becomes familiar, and what is familiar soon feels true. The mind unguarded will accept these stories as fact, and once accepted, they shape your assumption of self and therefore your reality. This is why vigilance is required, for the mind must be disciplined like a garden where weeds are not allowed to spread. To let fear run unchecked is to surrender your creative power, for fear and faith alike operate through the same law, and what you believe in fear manifests as surely as what you believe in hope. Fear imagines failure, fear rehearses loss, fear envisions the collapse of all you desire, and the law has no choice but to reproduce the picture impressed upon it. To guard your mind against fear is to take dominion over what you entertain. You are not at the mercy of every thought that arises. You are the chooser of the states you dwell in. When fear presents its images, you need not bow before them. You may replace them with the image of your fulfilled desire. To do this requires awareness, for fear often enters unnoticed, dressed as logic or practicality, yet beneath its disguise it is still the voice of limitation. Awareness exposes fear for what it is, a suggestion, not a command. Once you recognize that fear has no power unless you grant it belief, you reclaim the throne of your imagination. Guarding the mind is an act of persistence. It is a daily practice of noticing what thoughts are entertained and deciding which ones to feed. Just as a watchman at the gate does not permit strangers to enter unchecked, so too must you be the watchman of your own inner world. Let only the images of faith, love, and fulfillment pass through the gate, and deny entry to every thought that speaks of lack, loss, or defeat. This discipline does not mean living in tension. It means resting in authority, knowing that you are free to select the state in which you dwell. Fear loses its grip when you cease to honor it with attention. The moment you withdraw belief from its images, it begins to dissolve, for fear has no substance of its own. It survives only on borrowed energy from your imagination. Replace fear with the bold assumption of your desire already fulfilled, and the same power that once created nightmares will now produce miracles. Each time you choose faith over fear, you strengthen the habit of authority, until fear no longer has a foothold in your consciousness. To guard your mind is to guard your destiny, for the mind is the only workshop of creation. All outer experiences are but the echoes of inner conversations, and if those conversations are filled with fear, then fear becomes your world. But if they are filled with faith, then faith becomes flesh. The choice is always yours, and the law is impartial. Your task is not to wait for fear to disappear, but to stand unmoved by its presence, to persist in the inner conviction that imagination, directed by faith, is the sole reality. In this vigilance lies your freedom, for when fear is no longer allowed to rule your thoughts, nothing in the outer world can enslave you. Speak and act from the wish fulfilled, because the moment you occupy the state of the end, the world must conform to the assumption you carry within. Words are not idle sounds, they are vibrations of consciousness, carrying the weight of the state you dwell in. Actions are not mere motions, they are extensions of inner conviction, the natural outflow of the self you have assumed. When you speak from lack, you confirm lack. When you act from fear, you create fear. But when you speak from the wish fulfilled, and act as though it were already true, you are giving substance to the unseen reality you have chosen to inhabit. To speak from the wish fulfilled is to align your inner dialogue with the reality you desire. It is to no longer confess what you see with your physical eyes, but to boldly affirm what you see with the eyes of imagination. If wealth is your desire, then your words must reflect abundance, not poverty, for every statement is a seed cast into the field of consciousness. If health is your aim, then you do not give power to sickness in speech, you affirm life, vitality, and strength. Words must be chosen deliberately, for they echo the state you occupy, and the law cannot distinguish between joking words or serious ones. It reflects the feeling that underlies them. The more consistently you speak from the wish fulfilled, the more you condition your inner world to accept that state as natural, and once it feels natural, it must externalize. To act from the wish fulfilled is not to pretend in a hollow way, but to embody the state as if it were already fact. Action flows easily from belief, and when you believe that your desire is done, your conduct naturally reflects it. You carry yourself differently, you make decisions differently, you move through life with an air of certainty rather than hesitation. Acting from the end is not about forcing circumstances, but about aligning your behavior with the identity of the fulfilled self. If you assume the state of success, you act with confidence. If you assume the state of love, you act with kindness and openness. If you assume the state of freedom, you act without fear. These actions reinforce the state and keep you anchored in it until the world mirrors it back. To speak and act from the wish fulfilled requires persistence, because the senses will often present evidence to the contrary. Appearances may mock you, circumstances may contradict you, yet your task is to remain loyal to the end, not to the facts. You do not speak of how things are, you speak of how things are in the unseen. You do not act as a victim of what is visible, you act as the master who knows the invisible governs the visible. This persistence trains your mind to favor assumption over doubt, faith over fear, imagination over evidence. Consider how a child plays. When a child assumes the role of a hero, they speak and act as that hero without hesitation, without doubting, without needing proof. They live from the end so fully that the game becomes their reality. That same spirit of childlike assumption is required in conscious creation. Speak boldly, act boldly, for your inner world shapes the outer. The more faithfully you occupy the role of the one who already has, the faster the world must supply the evidence. Speaking and acting from the wish fulfilled is not a matter of performance for others, it is a matter of alignment within. You are not seeking to convince the world, You are convincing yourself, and once you are convinced, the world is compelled to follow. Do not let your words betray your desire by affirming lack. Do not let your actions betray your faith by moving in fear. Instead, let every word you utter and every step you take be a testimony to the reality you have claimed. Speak with gratitude. Act with confidence. Live as though you are already the person you desire to be. The outer world bends to the authority of an inner state consistently expressed. Speak from it until it becomes natural. Act from it until it feels inevitable, and persist until reality itself bows to your conviction. In this way, speaking and acting from the wish fulfilled becomes the bridge between imagination and manifestation. The proof of faith that refuses to wait for evidence, but dares to create it through the power of assumption. Persist until assumption becomes fact, because the law of consciousness is unfailing, and what you dare to sustain within will inevitably take form without. Assumption is the seed, persistence is the watering of that seed, and fact is the harvest that must appear. Many begin with assumption, but abandon it too soon, expecting immediate proof, and when none appears, they return to the old state, forgetting that persistence is the bridge between the invisible and the visible. The outer world often lags behind the inner conviction, not because the law is uncertain, but because consciousness must be sustained long enough for the new state to take root and dissolve the momentum of the old. To persist is to remain faithful to the unseen reality, to walk by faith and not by sight, to refuse to surrender the end, no matter what appearances suggest. Persistence is not effort. It is loyalty. It is not straining to make something happen, but choosing again and again to dwell in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Each time doubt arises, you return to the state. Each time fear whispers, you reaffirm the end. Each time the senses tempt you with contradiction, you remind yourself that appearances are shadows of yesterday's assumptions and cannot withstand the new state you now occupy. In this way, persistence becomes the shield that guards your assumption until it matures into fact. The world around you is nothing more than frozen belief. What you see as fact today was once an assumption, sustained either consciously or unconsciously. Your financial condition, your health, your relationships, your environment, all were once formed by repeated imaginal acts that crystallized into experience. If old assumptions could harden into fact, then new assumptions can do the same, provided they are held with persistence. Do not expect a single act of assumption to uproot years of contrary belief without the nourishment of persistence. Like a sculptor chiseling stone, persistence wears away resistance until the desired form stands revealed. Persistence requires patience, for the outer world often clings to the echoes of the old state. You may assume abundance and still see lack. You may assume health and still feel symptoms. You may assume love and still meet indifference. But your task is not to accept these as final. They are only the remnants of past assumptions, dissolving under the pressure of your new conviction. The law is certain, and if you persist, the facts must yield. To abandon your assumption in the face of delay is to uproot the seed before it bears fruit. To persist is to trust that the unseen processes are already at work, rearranging circumstances, moving people, shifting events to make your desire inevitable. Persisting until assumption becomes fact is the practice of living as though the end is already here. It is speaking from fulfillment, acting from fulfillment, thinking from fulfillment until fulfillment feels natural. The naturalness of a state is the sign that it is ready to externalize, and persistence is what carries you from unnatural effort to natural embodiment. At first it may feel like pretending, but as you persist, the line between imagination and reality dissolves, and soon you no longer have to remind yourself, for the state has become your dwelling place. When the state feels natural, the outer world has no choice but to conform. To persist is also to remain unmoved by time. The mind of man is often impatient, demanding visible proof within days or weeks, but creation does not obey impatience, it obeys assumption. Time is not your enemy, it is the servant of your persistence. Every day you sustain the state, you are compressing the gap between assumption and fact. Whether quickly or slowly, the law never fails, and your only task is to remain faithful until the bridge of incidents unfolds. That bridge may appear ordinary, as a sequence of natural events, or extraordinary, as sudden miracles, but the manner is not your concern. Your work is persistence, the law's work is manifestation. Persistence is the demonstration of faith. To persist is to believe more in the unseen end than in the seen facts. It is to declare that consciousness alone is reality, and that appearances are but reflections waiting to be reshaped. Each time you persist, you are impressing the subconscious with the image of the wish fulfilled, and the subconscious, once impressed, must externalize it. The subconscious does not reason. It does not question. It simply accepts the repeated assumption as truth and reproduces it faithfully. Therefore, persistence is the language by which you convince the subconscious of your desire's reality. Persist until assumption becomes fact. For nothing is too hard for imagination sustained. The same persistence that once sustained fear and doubt and produced unwanted facts can now be harnessed for faith and vision to produce the life you long for. Do not despise small beginnings. Do not abandon the seed in impatience. Do not let appearances dictate your faith. Stand firm in your assumption. Nourish it daily with thought, word, and feeling. Return to it whenever the mind wanders, and rest in the certainty that what you persist in imagining must one day stand before you as undeniable fact. The world is obedient to sustained imagination, and persistence is the proof of your mastery over circumstances. Faith over fear is the key to freedom, because every moment you are choosing which master you will serve, whether you will bow before the illusions of limitation or stand upon the eternal truth that imagination creates reality. Fear is bondage. It chains the mind to appearances. It convinces you that what you see is final, that facts cannot bend, that circumstances have power over you. Faith is freedom. It lifts the mind above appearances. It declares that nothing is fixed, that every fact is but a shadow of yesterday's belief, that imagination alone is sovereign. To live under fear is to live in reaction, tossed about by events and conditions, never realizing that those very conditions were born from fearful assumptions. To live by faith is to rise into creation, knowing that nothing has power over you except the state you choose to occupy. Fear is subtle. It whispers through reason, through memory, through the voices of others who themselves are bound by it. It tells you to be cautious, to wait for proof, to accept the evidence of the senses as final. But fear has no reality of its own. It borrows its life from your imagination. For when you imagine disaster, you give fear substance. And when you persist in that imagination, fear becomes fact. Faith operates by the same law, but in the opposite direction. When you imagine fulfillment and dare to persist, you give substance to the unseen good, and that too hardens into fact. The law does not choose for you. It will create equally from faith or fear. But freedom is found only when you choose faith. Faith is not blind hope. It is bold vision. It is the willingness to assume the end before the beginning has appeared, to occupy the state of fulfillment while the senses still deny it. Faith does not wait for circumstances to change. It changes the circumstances by refusing to acknowledge them as final. It is not careless denial, it is deliberate replacement. The conscious act of withdrawing belief from appearances and placing it in the unseen reality already prepared for you in imagination. Freedom is found in this shift, for when you no longer serve fear, you are no longer enslaved by conditions. Fear narrows life, it builds walls, it shuts doors. It convinces you that possibilities are limited. Faith expands life, it opens doors, it removes barriers, it reveals that all things are possible to the one who believes. Fear makes you a victim of chance. Faith makes you the master of destiny. Fear imagines the worst and then trembles before its own creation. Faith imagines the best and then rests in the certainty that it must come. Freedom is not the absence of challenges. It is the authority to know that challenges cannot define you, for you define yourself by the state you assume. The battle between faith and fear is not fought outside but within. It is fought in the silence of your inner conversations, in the secret images you entertain, in the feelings you allow to linger. Fear will often present itself as loud and urgent, demanding attention, while faith speaks in calm assurance. needing no drama because it knows the outcome is already secured. To choose faith over fear is to turn away from the noise of appearances and to rest in the stillness of imagination, to say within yourself, "It is done," even while the world insists it is not. This inner choice is the act of liberation, for the outer world must eventually reflect it. Faith requires persistence, for fear is deeply ingrained in the mind trained by the senses. You may find yourself tempted to slip back into doubt when appearances seem unchanged, but freedom is sustained by loyalty to the unseen. Each time you feel fear, you have the opportunity to practice faith. Each time you hear the voice of limitation, you can replace it with the voice of fulfillment. Each time the mind drifts to worry, you can redirect it to the end desired. Freedom is not found in never feeling fear, but in refusing to give it power. By choosing faith repeatedly, you weaken fear's hold until it no longer governs your state of being. Consider how every great change in history was born from someone choosing faith over fear. Fear said it could not be done, faith declared it already accomplished. Fear said the facts were against them, faith said facts bend to assumption. Fear mocked, delayed, resisted, but faith persisted, and in time faith was vindicated. The same law that has shaped nations and civilizations operates in your personal world. The moment you decide to live by faith, you step into the same creative stream that has produced every breakthrough, every miracle, every transformation known to man. Freedom is the natural result of faith because faith refuses to be bound by appearances. The prisoner who lives by faith is freer than the wealthy man who lives by fear. For one is confined only by walls, while the other is confined by his own mind. Faith opens the inner door to freedom long before the outer doors swing wide, and once the inner door is open, the outer must follow. Fear locks the imagination into repetition of the past. Faith opens imagination to the vision of the future. Fear insists that what has been will always be. Faith proclaims that what shall be is already accomplished. To live by faith is to live as though the unseen was seen, to dwell in the end regardless of appearances, to make imagination your dwelling place and not a passing escape. It is to see yourself already healed, already free, already fulfilled, and to speak and act from that conviction. Faith does not beg, it claims. Faith does not wait, it assumes. Faith does not tremble, it rests. And in that rest is freedom. For nothing in the outer world can shake the inner certainty once it is established. The key to freedom has always been faith over fear. For fear enslaves and faith liberates. Fear says you are a victim. Faith says you are the operant power. Fear says you must wait. Faith says you already are. Fear says look at the facts. Faith says facts will bend. Fear says you cannot. Faith says you already have. The law responds not to fear or faith in words, but to the feeling you dwell in, and whichever you persist in will become your world. Therefore, freedom lies in the choice you make moment by moment to withdraw power from fear and to give it wholly to faith. Faith over fear is the key to freedom because it restores to you the authority of your imagination, the recognition that nothing outside you dictates your destiny, that the only reality is the state you choose to assume. Fear may present itself as strong, but it is only sustained belief that gives it strength. Withdraw that belief, persist in faith, and fear collapses like a shadow at sunrise. In the light of faith, you are free, for you no longer live in reaction to appearances, but in creation from imagination. Faith over fear is freedom, because faith reveals the truth: you are not bound. You are not small, you are not limited. You are the Creator clothed in human form. And the world will always reflect what you dare to assume with persistence and conviction.